Hey everybody, David Costello here, founder and CEO of Jetpack Workflow and host of Growing Your Firm podcast. Today we have a returning guest, Adi Clavette. She is the leader and visionary of Business Success Consulting Group. Last time she was on the pod, we talked all about kind of process and how to build systems. Now she's back 4 years later. She's learned a lot. She's been in the industry. She's been in the trenches. She's seen the evolution of an accounting firm. So we're going to really talk about why do you need to get started? What is the driving force behind it? And then how do you actually start implementing some of these foundational changes in your firm that are really needed to grow and scale? But Adi, first, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, the first place I really want to start is what are the missteps people have when they're trying to figure out if documentation is worth it or not. This is not typically seen as fun or glamorous, so it gets pushed to the sideline. So let's just start at the basics. I mean, what is the most critical factor when you go on this journey and you start thinking about, systems and processes?
The most fundamental one is really making the decision that that's important enough for you, because we all know, we run into the no time, right? I mean, I'm an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur. We know that, it's like time is definitely a very valuable asset. So we will put time into the things that are important for us, into the things that we feel like will give us the biggest return on investment, right? Because we use time as a commodity. So we first of all need to decide the process documentation and the processes and procedures are important for the firm. And in order to decide that, you have to ask yourself the question, why? Why do I want to document? And really have a very good and honest answer to this question. Why processes and procedures? Not something that, now I'm supposed to have processes and procedures because I was told that way, or my competitors have it, so I should have it as well, or I read a book and it says there that I should have processes. Well, that's fine, but it's not really your why. So you need to really figure out like why, because that will motivate you to start and to finish. So some examples would be, for instance, you want to acquire another firm. And you know that in order to do that, you have to have consistency of operation, because you first of all have to understand how you operate before you bring on new staff from another firm that might have operated differently. If you don't have it documented, it will be very hard to merge them. So that's an example. Let's say you want to grow organically, not necessarily by acquisition. So either by, you're growing or you decide to take on a more aggressive marketing campaign. Again, you're going to grow. You have to make sure that you have the platform and you have the infrastructure to get more clients. Let's say, for instance, you have a key employee that has been with you for a long time, or even not a long time, but several key employees that are very competent, that you know that if they don't show up for work, you are going to have trouble. There is going to be trouble there because you're in the middle of tax season, your office manager quit or something happened, and then what? If you had well-documented processes and procedures in place, the risk will be much less. Let's say you're growing and your customer service is not as good as it used to be. Your client services, you feel like you're getting complaints from clients, or you feel like you're not giving the right amount of time for each client, etc. Well, you need processes and procedures. So your why will be in order to maintain very high client engagement and client service. So that's where you really have to identify your why. And whenever I meet with a client or a prospect, I always ask for that why. And that why really has to be convincing. It has to be something that compels you to move forward and saying, yes, this solution is well-documented processes and procedures.
That's amazing. And once somebody has their why and they dig into this, is a common trap that people underestimate the amount of work that goes into documentation and processes, right? Like we've seen some examples in the space where it's like, well, I have my 5-part checklist. I have my 5 steps here. Is it common where people have either too little or too much documentation as they go on this journey? Like, what are some common mistakes once they have their why, they needed to solve it? What are the footfalls they need to be aware of?
Yeah, so basically it's like, how do you get started? Because some have the idea that it might be very stressful, hard, whatever you want to use, in terms of like, it will take a lot in order to document those processes and procedures. And that will prevent them from even starting, right? Or some start, but they don't have it well designed. So they will basically, that will also be a mistake or something that will stop them from completing the project, because you maybe just, let's say you start on the documentation and you're documenting how to reconcile a bank account. Let's say you're a bookkeeping and tax preparation company or a CPA, and you decide to document how you're going to reconcile an account. Well, that's just like one little aspect of all the processes and procedures, but you get stuck there because you go into details and details and details. But then what about the rest of the processes and procedures you have to document? So my advice is always to create a high level infrastructure of the processes and procedures that have to be in place. So, and always then ask yourself the question, which area of the practice, if you had well-documented processes and procedures, will get you the biggest return on investment? And return on investment is not always in terms of money. I mean, obviously it will all, at the end, it will end up in terms of profitability. But return on investment can be your goodwill and reputation, because you will be able to do the client intake in such a way where you'll get rave fans as opposed to complaints, right? The return on investment might be retention of key employees or of employees you want to retain because they're not too stressed out. Return on investment will be maybe to manage the tax season, so it's not hours after hours after hours of working, but you actually have a balance there as well because you are following certain processes. So those are the two steps in terms of figuring the infrastructure and asking yourself where to start. Now, in terms of the infrastructure, you have to look at the flow in the firm, right? So look at a client journey and map that. So a client, where does it start? It starts with your marketing. So you are reaching out to prospective clients, if you are, or it might be just you're getting it from referrals. And then it follows through client intake. What is your client intake like? What are the main steps in terms of client intake? So you have the qualification of a new client. Then you have the actual giving the information. So whether you are going to jump on a call, you automate it, you have the receptionist do it, the office manager do it. Again, you have to really figure out that client intake and the journey at the beginning of a new client until they sign the engagement letter. And at that point, it's the onboarding. So what's the onboarding like? What are your main steps in terms of onboarding? And from there, it goes into the actual delivery and production. So that's where the tax preparation comes in. That's where the bookkeeping, if you are advising, so it can be your consulting services and your advisory services. Then it's the actual product or the actual tax. Let's say it's a tax preparation, so you get the actual tax return, right? But then there is also the regular maintenance and being in communication with clients. So, and then the client journey should end with a repetition because you are a repetitive business. Mm-hmm. So how do we ensure that we retain the clients? How do we ensure that we actually have some kind of a quality control to ensure that the clients are getting what they need? And of course, how do we stay in communication with them so we actually can balance the workload throughout the year? And also something that many of us do not do, which is basically ask for referrals proactively and ask for reviews, right? So this is all part of the client journey. So each one of them should be a process. And then of course you have the management of your own firm, which will be your own bookkeeping, your own admin, your own the customer service that you're providing behind the scenes. So you have that aspect as well, which is like the back office, that it all contributes to the client journey, but it's something that it's more the management of your firm. So those are all processes and procedures that have to be mapped out first on a high level. And then you ask yourself the question, where do I start so I can get the biggest ROI? And then continue from there to a process documentation to document those processes.
Amazing. And I do want to dig into quality control because I don't think we've talked about that enough on the podcast. But the quick high level infrastructure outline was kind of marketing, client intake, onboarding, delivery, and production. Something about retention and repeatability of those production engines, referrals and reviews, and then your own back office management, which I would kind of tuck in your own kind of management cadence when you do check-ins, when do you do one-on-ones, how do you run huddles, or whatever you're doing at your firm, kind of all falls into this kind of
Correct. And
internal.
what systems you use, right? Like Jetpack Workflow as an example, that will fall into, it's a system that you are using, and you should have protocols around that as well. Obviously, when you're documenting your your day-to-day activities, whether it's bookkeeping or tax preparation or tax planning, I mean, Jetpack will fall into it because that's the tool you're utilizing, but also an overall, like, how do we use Jetpack? How often do we refer? I mean, obviously you refer to it all the time because that's your tool, but in terms of reporting, in terms of monitoring tasks, etc., that's part of that back office or admin of the practice.
So, well, two things. I do want to then dig into the high level, but let's dig into quality control. So I don't hear this enough on the pod. So what are things that you've seen developed or develop yourself around quality control when it comes to either any of these systems or ideally around delivery and production? Because I feel like that's not something that's built into a lot of processes that we've seen.
Correct. It's there are different levels that can be done, but the main thing is not to be afraid to ask your clients, how was the service? Because what I run into, and I advised many CPA firms and bookkeeping, accounting firms, I wrote their processes and procedures. And what I see is that, tax season comes, you get busy, and you are interested in getting it out the door, right? Getting the tax return out the door, making sure the P&L is all clean and the balance sheet is clean so we can actually create a tax return, etc. But not enough actions are being done in order to make sure that the client actually had a good experience, or in terms of like, not that you are not doing it so they will have a good experience, but basically going back and asking, well, how was your experience? So you can proactively catch those that did not have a good experience and do something in order to retain them. Because sometimes you might be shy of doing that because you might be concerned, well, I know I had a really rough tax season, my main person was sick and the other one quit, and I was trying to make it all together, put it all together. I know I was late, and I don't want to ask the client about it. But that is really like putting your head in the sand, because the problem is there. It's not going to go away. My recommendation is always do a net promoter score. Ask how likely are you to refer to how was your experience and how likely are you to refer to us, right? Dig into like, are you satisfied with what the service that you got? Do you feel like it was on time? Do you have any questions that we didn't answer? Reach out and have that communication so you actually ensure that there's going to be retention, because that is where the profitability comes in, is when you're actually retaining the same clients as opposed to every single time having to onboard new clients. So if you have a recurring stream of satisfied clients, they will also bring clients that are similar to them. And then you can just, you have a flow of new clients, but also retain your existing clients. And, and quality control is also internal in terms of like, how did we do? I mean, what happened this tax season? I always do that with my clients, my CPA clients, that at the end of tax season, we look at the processes, we evaluate the processes and procedures, we evaluate how things went, right? And what went well, what didn't go so well, make the list, and then pull out the processes and procedures, and where did we miss? Those things that didn't go as well, what are we missing in terms of the processes? How can we improve? Those things that went well, great. So what can we do to make sure that they actually go even better next time? What are the processes that contribute to that? Let's make sure that everyone knows what they are, so it's not left to chance, but it's actually something that can be reproducible, something that is consistent, something that is known.
Love it. Well, let's zoom back out to the high level. So you said that you map out the infrastructure, then you look at what's biggest ROI. Could be financial, could not be financial. Then what do you do, right? Like how do you zoom in and start taking action?
Right. So, if you have a team, utilize the team. It's not something that the business owner has to do all by themselves, because, if you are the CPA, if you are the main accountant, if you are the main tax preparer, your time is valuable. And I mean, everybody's time is valuable, but your time is better utilized. If you're the rainmaker, then bring more business. You're not supposed to just sit there and document the processes and procedures. You can do some, but definitely delegate and use your team. So that is a key component. So the way that I run the project is, we identify the key processes and procedures that have to be documented. We prioritize them using that question on the return on investment. And then we figure out who is going to be responsible for what procedure or what process, right? So for instance, tax preparation. All right, so who is going to do who is going to document how you do an individual tax return? Who is going to document the business part? But even in a business tax return, there are different parts to it. You have to collect the information, you have to process the information, you have to ask questions, you have to do different things. So you can assign 2-3 procedures for each one of your preparers that that's their strengths. For instance, I was working with a company where we assigned the preparation itself to one preparer, and then the quality control and the review to another preparer. So they each wrote their procedures. So that worked great. So each person has their own responsibility of what they have to document. And then they document, and we'll talk about that in a second, what's the best way of doing that. And once it's done, then you have basically each other review what the other wrote, right? So that way best practices are shared or added to, comments are added to what was written. Well, this is, let's say, you and I, each one of us is writing a different procedure. We read each other's procedures, and then I can say, David, this is great. I never thought about it. A great way of doing it. Here is how I do it. Can we create a way that is actually consistent, or maybe we can have way A and way B depending on different circumstances. So we define it, right? So that's how we arrive at consistency and agreement. And then obviously we publish it and make it followed by all. So that is the next step after we're done with the documentation. So, but let's talk right now about how to document, because I know that is a key point, right, David? You and I talked about that in terms of, especially with accountants and CPAs, tax season, who has time for it during tax season? But what the thing is, tax season is the best time to document. Yes, this is what I said. It's like tax season is the best time to document. Why? Because that is when you're actually doing the work, and that's when you want to document, right? So what I recommend doing is preparing the infrastructure before tax season. So let's say, for instance, we prepare the infrastructure in July, August, as an example, right? So we map the entire workflow, we prepare the infrastructure, we figure out what are the procedures that have to be written, we prioritize, we assign it to the different members, right? And then what happens when you're actually doing and performing the actual actions, then you start documenting it, because all you need to do is fill in the blanks. It's like a big form where you go, okay, this is a tax preparation. Those are the main aspects of what I do. Now let me document how I do that. It might be real, it might not be real. I mean, we've worked with companies that have done that. Another way of doing it is basically, now that you know what you need to document, is video. Is basically record yourself doing that. And then this is what we do, is like, we then take those videos and we actually write procedures from those videos, right? We maybe need to interview more, but we know how to extract the main points out of the video. We know how to create the right screenshots. We know how to create the right instructions. And when you're doing the videos, this is very important, because this is not just technical writing, just like basically transcribing the video. this is really explaining your method, your way. So why are you doing it that way? So let's say you're in the middle of preparing a tax return and you know what are the main steps and you want to record a video, basically using Loom or Screencastify or any software to record your screen. Make sure that when you're recording it, you're actually explaining it as if though you're explaining to a new staff member, to a new CPA you just hired. Why do you do it that way? You know, why this is your way of doing it. So then when that video can be written, made into a written procedure, then that aspect of why you are doing it is not lost. So that's really the knowledge transfer. And, you know, and you might, if you want to do it yourself, you might just leave it in video form, but at least you'll have it there as opposed to not having. So you can have the high level of the procedure and then the how can be in a video. And I recommend using a process documentation platform like SweetProcess, Whale, Trainual, so you can actually embed those videos and you can actually write those steps very easily. And that way you can come out of tax season with the content there, and then you can start writing the actual procedures.
Amazing. Well, one of the final questions I have, and you covered so much already, so I hope everybody's taking notes, but you mentioned something a little bit earlier, which is you said followed by all. So you have the infrastructure and you go through this documentation. So maybe then, you know, some of the things that maybe a firm owner might dread is, oh my gosh, now I have to track all these things. I have to track the compliance of all these things. And so what are simple ways for a listener to kind of wrap their head around, how do I make sure it's followed by all? How do I run quality control against the entire system to know that we are doing what we, you know, documented in the first place?
Yeah, so that, you know, the implementation is very important, because otherwise what you're going to have is a great files that nobody looks at, right? And you know, I actually recorded a whole podcast in my podcast, the System Simplified podcast, and about how to get the procedures followed by all, because that is definitely a question that everybody asked, and it was a 45-minute podcast. And we can give a link to that if people want to listen, but
Absolutely.
I'm going to just summarize the main points. So the first thing is we have to make sure that it becomes a habit and it becomes a way of running the firm, right? So it starts with you, the business owner, really having that mindset that we are going to refer to our processes and procedures whenever there is an issue, whenever there is a new staff that comes on board, that they're going to use it, but also as a refresher and as a way of, like I mentioned before, at the end of each tax season, you know, take a look and rate yourself. How did I do this tax season? What worked, what didn't work? And pull out the procedures or log into your software and look at what you have and go procedure by procedure and say, yeah, this worked great. This was not followed. This one is missing, etc. So you really do that inventory. So that's one way to keep it alive. And another way is really using it as a tool of learning. So it ties into that, but it's basically not having to wait until the end of tax season. But whenever you encounter an issue, you always refer, well, is it written? What is written? Is it written correctly? Did we apply it? Do we have to improve it? So by using a process documentation platform, you can also see how often your staff are actually logging in to look at it. You can see how often they are reviewing it and revising it. You have different, revision control, like version control. So you can, it can just be changed, but it has to be asked for approval. So that's one way of keeping it alive, but making sure that it's not just being changed without your consent or your approval. So there are many ways of doing it, but it really has to, just like I said, you know, in the beginning, you have to find your own why. You have to be convinced that having processes and procedures is the only way to grow and scale. And you have to basically, by example, lead everyone to be using it on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a real treat. I think we covered a lot of ground in just 25, 30 minutes. I'm sure people want to follow up, learn more, listen to your podcast, reach out, say thank you. What is the best way for our listeners to connect with you?
So they can visit our website, which is bizsuccesscg.com. So it's B-I-Z, the word success spelled out, CG for consultinggroup.com. They can call us at 503-662-2911. They can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's Adi Klevit, ADI, and KLEVIT. And they can find me and the podcast on any major podcast platform. It's the Systems Simplified podcast.
Amazing, Adi. And if people were listening and they couldn't document everything they were listening to today, we're going to link everything up, jetpackworkflow.com/blog, jetpackworkflow.com/blog. We'll link up to the podcast. We'll link up to your LinkedIn, to your site. We'll document everything we went through today. And if you enjoy this interview, please leave a review. And if you really enjoy this interview, share it with a fellow firm owner who needs to hear something like this. Adi, again, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, David.